a lot of places that I speak, and I know that other speakers will echo this, the people that come to the presentations we give look at us like that we're some super beekeepers, that I'm going to listen to him because he knows how to keep his bees alive and his bees never die, and he always makes a big crop of honey and makes lots of money with his bees. All of his queens, get a queen from him because all of them are super. Well, that's a bunch of baloney. I'm not a super beekeeper. I'm just a beekeeper like you guys that has done so many things wrong that I know how to correct mistakes because I'm still here. There's two ways to stay in business, beekeeping. One is to learn how to make more bees, and the other is to be comfortable buying more bees. And that pretty much is the talk. We can all go to Dairy Queen now. But seriously, if you're going to expand your business, your beekeeping business, build into it. Don't buy into it. Now, the exception to that is if you've already been there and you know how to keep bees alive and something has just blindsided you, which happens more often these days than it used to. It's okay to buy back into it because you know how to keep your bees alive, with the exception of whatever knocked your population down the last time. Everybody has heard about varroa mites and viruses ad nauseum. That's a Latin term that means until it makes you puke. That's the West Kentucky term for ad nauseum. We've heard all about varroa mites, and you're going to hear at the end of the day today, Clarence is going to give a really good talk about the connection between varroa and viruses. And that's something that will be a benefit to everybody here to hear that. So, with that said, you got to keep your varroa populations low to stay in business. Not just low coming out of winter and low going back into winter. You got to keep your varroa populations, you got to stay on top of it every month these days. Now, that don't mean you have to treat every month. That means you have to make sure that you don't have a high mite count at least 4 times a year, at least once a quarter. You've got to do, if you're going to keep your bees healthy. Now, I know that I'm saying this and that there's going to be some people, maybe several people, who say, well, I didn't do that last year, my bees are still alive. Yeah. And there's bees that live in trees for 5 and 6 years and don't die out. And when they do die, it's usually from excessive swarming, and the virgin queen don't come back from a mating flight and the hive dies. They're not under the pressure that our managed bees are under. Bees were actually doing a really good job of staying alive until we started trying to help them stay alive. We started moving bees around, putting a lot of stress on the bees. And stress is one of the things that goes kind of under the radar for us. Every time you're in a hive of bees, look at the stress that's on a hive of bees that's living in a tree or in a wall of a house or something. Nobody's ever bothered. Nobody's taking any food away from them. Nobody's putting a foreign substance in the hive that then they have to deal with. And there's a lot less stress on those colonies compared to our colonies where we're monkeying around in them, probably more than we need to. But if you have a managed colony, you have to stay on top of the problems that you're having, that you're going to have. And as good as you can be, you're going to lose hives. You can be right on top of every possible issue and go out on any given day and realize that that's not normal activity in front of that hive. and you open the hive up, when you open the hive up, the bees should come up to the top of the frames and be looking at you like, we're gonna kill you. But if that hive is in big trouble, being robbed to death, when you open the hive up, the bees all leave because they've been busted. And they don't fly out after you, they fly back home. So you realize that traffic in front of the hive are robbers. And you thought the hive was healthy a week ago, something happened. That's beekeeping. And that's not comfortable for us to get through our head. That's beekeeping. I tell people that come to our place and want to learn something about beekeeping or queen rearing or whatever, and I tell them, well, first they always ask me if I get stung, and I say, are you talking about today? I haven't been stung today yet. And I tell them that there's two absolutes in beekeeping, and the first one is you will get stung, and the second one is your bees are going to die. And until you get comfortable with knowing that just because my hive was alive last week does not mean it will be alive next week, when you get that into your philosophy of beekeeping, then you can make plans. Then you know what you're going to do when you find that empty hive. And that's probably the two most important things to put into your beekeeping management plan. The two most important things are to know how to look at a frame and understand what you're seeing, know what's going wrong, and then know how to fix it. That's the one thing. The next thing is to know how to replace an empty hive. Part of that knowing how to replace may involve knowing how to raise queens. And none of this is rocket science. It don't require a master's or a doctorate to know how to do this. And Roy Lynch is a perfect example of that. I had to pick on Roy because he fed me dog food at a bee school. Anyway,
there's more to come.
Anyway, I used to say that when I was younger and more arrogant, I used to say, I can show anybody how to raise a queen. Then I found somebody that I could not show how to raise a queen. There was a disconnect there. I mean, this person just, they couldn't make the connection between you do this and this is what you expect to get, and then you take that and do this. I don't know, they just couldn't do it. So kind of like, if you get me up on the top of a 24-foot ladder, extension ladder, I'm not doing nothing except staying there until the fire department comes. And that was the disconnect. So there are people that just do not have the ability to develop the skill set, but those are very rare. I don't know how many people that I've shown how to raise queens over the years, but it's a lot of them, and I wouldn't even guess, but it's a very small percentage of people that just can't make that leap. You can do it. You can raise queens. If you have ever had a swarm, you have raised a queen. You just wasn't aiming to. So part of knowing how to manage your losses, and that's really what this is about, managing your losses, is knowing what it takes to raise a queen. It's fine to buy a queen. I buy queens every year. I raise probably anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 queens a year, but I buy queens every year because I'll get caught in a spot where that I've got to have mated queens, and I don't have anything, and I don't have time for them to be mated while the bees are sitting in one place because they're going to move. So Nothing wrong with buying queens. Choose carefully who you buy them from. Try not to buy any queens from somewhere that you know has Africanized bees. South Texas, Texas period, South Florida, Arizona, New Mexico, the places that you know are likely, you're likely to get a queen that was mated with African drones. Don't buy queens from there. There's plenty of other places to buy queens that have good queens. So, once you've established it's okay.
Where do you buy your queens?
I'll have one person in California that I get queens from that does a great job of raising queens because that's all he does. And he only does it at one particular time during the year. And I'm not afraid to give people's names out if I'm confident they have a good product. And I'm not saying buy queens from this guy. I'm just saying that when you need a queen, he's probably going to have one and he'll get it to you in 2 days. And it's Greg Zitlaw is the man's name, Z's Bees. And I buy queens from other places too, Will Banks. I buy queens from them. I've bought queens from Rossman before. I bought queens from Roberts Bee Company. I bought queens from a lot of different people. There's not anybody that I've ever bought queens from, probably dozens of different queen producers. It's not anybody that I ever put on a list that said never buy a queen here again. Everybody has good queens. Everybody has dogs. Once in a while you're gonna get one that if you get 10 good queens, one of them's gonna get superseded, or 2 of them. But that's the value of knowing how to raise your own queens. If you know how to raise your own queens, then that removes a lot of anxiety from you. Where in the world am I going to find a queen? Well, I know where. I'll go dequeen a hive and cut some queen cells out in a few days. Easy enough. You don't even have to graft. Unless you're going to be raising over 50 queens, you don't have to graft. If you're just wanting replacement queens for your bees, it's good enough just to dequeen a hive and come back in 5 days and cut out all of the capped cells and leave the uncapped cells because those are made from younger larvae and will make a better queen. And when those are capped, cut them out, use them in a mating nuke or use them to requeen your hive. And it's a simple process. It helps you understand the biology of a honeybee colony when you learn how to raise queens, especially if you learn how to graft, because you got to learn how to tell the age of the larva if you're grafting, unless you have a timing box or something like that, which I've had timing boxes and used them, and I'm way too disorganized to use anything that requires organization. So it's easier for me just to age the larva and graft the larva that's the right age. So it helps you understand, learning how to raise queens helps you understand the anatomy and the biology of a colony of bees. And it removes the anxiety of not having a queen. You gotta have a queen to start a new colony, and that includes walkaway splits, making walkaway splits. When you make a walkaway split, all you're doing is dividing a hive evenly. You make sure that that hive has eggs, larvae, pupa, pollen, honey, and bees. You don't care if it's got a queen or not, but both halves need to have the same thing in it. If one half of it, Roy.
You're making a split, would you rather take the queen with your split?
If I'm making a split, I'd rather take the old queen and move her.
Okay.
The reason for that is that it changes the pheromone signature in the hive that you're splitting. You're taking that pheromone and moving it. So one reason that you make a split is because this hive is blowing up in population and it's probably going to swarm. If you don't split it, it's going to split itself. So you move the old queen and make a split, and you allow them to raise their own queen, or you introduce a queen, and that changes the pheromone signature. and it gives the bees, well, I'm trying to think like a bee, and I don't think like a bee, because they do things that I think are absolutely stupid. And I'm sure they have the same feeling about me. But it changes the pheromone signature, and in theory, they should get the feeling that they have swarmed, that they have, the swarming instinct is all about reproduction at the colony level. And when you remove the queen, that puts them into an emergency situation, or they think, oh my goodness, mama's gone and we gotta have another one. And they'll start making queen cells out of 3-day-old larvae, and some 2-day, and occasionally 1-day-old larvae. But they're wanting to cut to the chase and get a queen as quick as possible back in the hive. So they start with 3-day-old larvae, which are, generally speaking, poor quality queens. So if you move the old queen, they'll still go into that emergency situation, but if you put another queen in there, that for sure changes the pheromone. Even if they raise another queen, it's going to be a different, it'll be a unique individual pheromone smell to that new queen. And they're going to, in theory, they're going to feel like they have met the need for reproduction with the colony. So, I said all that to say this, that it has a tendency to reduce swarming if you split a big hive in the spring. Roy?
If you split that hive and they've already got queen cells, swarm cells started, are they gonna go ahead and swarm?
If there's a queen cell started in a hive, if it's capped, they're gonna swarm, even if you split it. If it's uncapped, they might swarm, even if you split it. But if it's just a cup with nothing in it, or maybe even just an egg in it, they're probably not gonna swarm. It depends on how mature the cell is. Once a cell is capped, that pupa in there, that queen pupa, has begun producing pheromones. And the larvae don't have the same working glands that a pupa does. A pupa has the same working glands as an adult bee. It's just not working to full effect yet. So the bees understand. They feel queen right when there's a capped queen cell in the hive, and that's usually when the swarm leaves, as soon as the queen cell is capped in the hive. If they have not swarmed yet, they've already got that in the plans. And once they start planning something, they don't stop. Yes?
Okay, so I have a question about that. If you have queen cells, like swarm cells, but you take the existing queen and pull her out, put her in the nuke or whatever, and then who do they leave with then? If they swarm, who's swarming?
Virgin queen.
The virgin queen will
They'll leave with a virgin queen. And if I'm making a split like that, and I see that there's a capped queen cell in here, but here's the queen, I'll make a split with the queen, with the existing queen, 2 or 3 frames of bees, depending on how the temperature is. And if there's more than one capped cell, then I will cut that cell out and use it in I graft and I produce hundreds and hundreds of queen cells every year, but I'm not above cutting one out. I've lost a lot of the arrogance that I once had as a beekeeper, and bees will do that to you. They'll make you humble the longer you're keeping bees. And I'm not so arrogant anymore as to think I can make a better queen cell than they do. So if it's a nice looking queen cell, I'll cut it out and use it in a mating nuke or make another split with it. If they swarm, they swarm. Usually what I will do, I'll take all but about 2 frames of bees out of that hive that has a capped queen cell in it and make splits with them with other cells, with the cells that are in there. And I'll leave that hive, and if that 2 frames of bees wants to swarm, so be it. The bees that will be swarming are foragers, because I've moved pretty much all the nurse bees out. That's another thing to think about if you're making a walkaway split to increase your bee numbers. you move the old queen, or you don't even care where the queen is with a walkaway, but if you have a choice between making this one, if you have 12 frames of bees, move 7 frames and leave 5 frames on its stand, because you're going to catch all the foragers coming back to that home. You always leave the home hive light, because you're going to catch the foragers coming back. The population is going to be roughly the same, because you're going to have 2 to 3 frames of bees that are foragers. They're going to come back to that hive. They'll keep the heat level good enough that they can make a queen if they need to, if the queen's not in there. And the other one will have enough bees. It's all about heat in the cluster. And they have to keep the cluster, the temperature regulated, in order to be able to produce queen cells and brood, period. So that's a walkaway split. Anybody can do that. Well, almost anybody can do that. Yes.
What time of year do you want to start doing your splits?
Well, it depends on where you are and what kind of forage you have available. As soon as you see a mature drone, or not a mature drone, just a drone, an emerged drone, you can start making splits. Because once a drone emerges, it takes about 14 days for them to become mature enough to mate with a queen. Well, when you make a split, within 14 days, it's going to take them about that long to make a queen. It's going to take them 10 to 11 days to make a queen. If you cut out the capped cells, it'll take them 13 days to make a queen. So you're right there on the cusp where that if you're seeing a drone walking around or flying around, if you see him flying around, he's ready. But if they're just walking around on a frame, you know that by the time your queen is ready to take a mating flight, that the drone's going to be ready too. So as soon as you see drones, now a few years ago, we had a winter where that our bees didn't kick the drones out in West Kentucky. We just didn't have much of a winter until March. People planted corn. Normally corn planting time is last week of March, first week of April, and forward. People planted corn second week of March, some even earlier. Corn was up about like this, and it came a hard freeze for 3 days. Corn turned as black as these tables. All had to be replanted. The leaves on the trees turned as black as these tables. Oak leaves were the size of my hand. And it was unreal. And bees that had been building up like crazy just went like this. Queens quit, and actually that year I had already started some queens because I fell into the same trap thinking, wow, we're not gonna have winter this year. Well, it showed me. So normally, as soon as you see drones, you can start making splits. But you want a hive big enough to make the splits with. And it's like I was saying, heat is the main consideration. You've got to have at least 3 to 4 frames full of bees to be able to make a successful split. In the spring, especially. Now, if you're making a split and you've only got, if you have a hive that's got 7 frames of bees in it, and you're thinking, I'm here and I've got time to do this, and I have some mated queens that I can put in here, or I have queen cells that I can put in here, I'm going to make these splits. If you have a choice between splitting a 7-frame hive, or you need to make that choice, use nuke boxes. Downsize the boxes where the bees can control the temperature better in that brood nest. The heat don't always convect all the way to the sides because the frames are a barrier in a 10-frame hive, but the heat that does convect away from the frames, if it hits the edge of a nuke box, it'll come back. And if it does convect away from the frames it's got a long way to go to come back in a 10 frame hive. So, use nuke boxes if you have any doubt that you got too few bees to be able to heat that brood nest. 3 frames is an absolute minimum, and 3 frames is a minimum if you're using a 5 frame nuke box. In a 10 frame box, 5 frames, 4 to 5 frames. 4 frames if they're packed with bees, 5 frames if they just have bees on. Those are minimums that you need to keep in mind that you're using to make splits. Now, I was talking about a walkaway split. That's one way to increase your numbers without having to worry about raising queens. Roughly 2 out of 3 of your walkaway splits will be successful. Over the years, our year in, year out average for getting virgin queens back from a mating flight is about 70%. 3 out of 10 never come back from a mating flight. Now that's an average. Last year, I had one that every single one round of queens, every single one came back. And we were above 90% up until July, but by the end of the year, we were down to 70 because they got really poor coming back in July. And early August, I cut off the queen rearing. Normally, I try to force it, but this last year, I actually took my own advice and just, that's it. No more losses this year. So, don't think that you did anything wrong. If you're raising queens, don't think it was your fault if you don't get queens returned. If that cell emerged, and you can tell if it emerged, if the queen cell emerges, you didn't do anything wrong. The queen came back, she took a mating flight, and went in the wrong direction coming home, or got into a wind draft, or maybe a little rain shower, or maybe a bird. Later in the summer, a dragonfly. Last year we had dragonflies, really heavy population of dragonflies, really early. We normally don't get them until late June, July. We had them last year in the 1st of May. So raising queens had another hazard there. If you buy queens, you don't have that issue. That's one pitch for buying queens. Of course, there's a con to every probe. That's a probe. You don't have to worry about predators or wind drafts. The con is $40, $35, or whatever you're paying for a queen. So just take all of those calculations into account when you decide how to grow your apiary. And this is all a personal choice. I don't buy packages unless there's somebody that I've done business with for quite some time that calls and says, I got some packages that a guy just didn't want, and I've got them here, and I've got to do something with them. Well, are they like free? Well, no, but I'll let you have them at my cost. Okay, I'll be there in a little while. That's the only time I buy packages. It's not because the packages are a poor product, it's because nukes and splits are a better product. And I do catch swarms. I don't have a lot of swarm traps out, but I get a lot of swarm calls. And like I said, I am beyond useless on a ladder. So my first question is, how high are they? And everybody always says, oh, you can reach them on a short ladder.
Yeah.
Well, these guys are used to working for ladder companies on fire trucks. It's a short ladder, it's only 20 feet. So everybody has a poor judge of height with swarms. How big a swarm is it? It's huge. We almost died We almost ran the lawnmower right under it, and we would have died if they'd fallen off on us. And you get there, and you could put every one of them in your ball cap. And they always are standing at the window and won't even open the door to talk to you, but they'll talk through the window, and they say, "That was huge, wasn't it?" Well, it was a big one. You're lucky, you know. You have a higher power watching out for you. You're surviving. And so, but I do catch swarms. And I know that a lot of the swarms come from our bees, and I don't care. I mean, a swarm's a swarm is a swarm. Some of the swarms have virgin queens, and if you catch a swarm, always check it in about a week to a week and a half, and make sure that there's eggs in there. Eggs or larvae in there. If there's not, you know what's got to happen. Get a queen. Put a queen in there. At worst case, join it to another hive. But I spoke at a beekeepers meeting in Arkansas one time. It was an all-day session, and they had a podium that had a microphone built into it. So I turned my phone off. And in the middle of the thing, everybody almost jumped out of their seat and ran out of the building. They thought it was an earthquake because the vibration ringer went off, and it went through that microphone into the sound system. So it just did that, which reminded me of that. But anyway, it's okay to catch swarms. Number one, make sure your bees are healthy after you catch the swarm. Number two, make sure they got a queen in them. And if they don't always depend on being able to take a frame of eggs from one hive and putting it in another one and then making a queen out of it. If the bees that you're putting that into are not young bees, all swarms are not made of young bees. Secondary swarms, the more a hive swarms, the bigger the percentage of old bees in that swarms. So if you put a frame of eggs in a hive that has a bunch of old bees in it, they're going to look at it and say, well, I used to be good at raising babies, but not no more. They're not going to make queen cells. If they do, they're going to be real poor, really poor. Their glands don't work as well. They're atrophied. Once they quit having to use their hypopharyngeal gland to make brood food, that gland atrophies, and they're not good at raising queens. When I'm making cell builders, and if you learn how to graft, or if you're learning how to make bees using a Hobson method, which is something you could study, and it's a non-grafted method that you can make really good queens with. You still have to have a cell builder. And I know when my cell builder is getting too old, my cell starter is getting too old, because the cells will start getting shorter. And the comb that the queen cell is made out of will keep getting darker. The young bees are able to produce the wax, fresh wax, that it takes to make a queen cell. The cells will be light, really white looking when they're real young, and they continue to get darker and darker and darker. The older they get, the wax glands atrophy, and they start having to rob propolis and wax and other stuff, other substances. They have to rob that to finish the queen cell. So the cells get darker, and because they're having to rob that, they also get shorter. And they're not feeding that pupa as well as they would have when they're young. So I know when my cell builder's getting too old just by the look of the queen cells. And I know that the next time, instead of getting 70 queen cells, I'll probably get 40. But I'm hard-headed, so I'll go again. I'll go ahead and get 40, thinking, well, maybe they'll make 70 again. And they don't ever, but I'm slow to learn things.
Can you drop in a frame of cat brood? Would that help?
That will help in a week.
In a week? Okay.
In a week. It takes a week for a frame of cat brood. If you're dropping that in, it takes a week to actually get any positive effect from it. But yeah, I mean, it will help with the graft after that.
Okay.
Because I'm grafting once every 4 days and using 2-day-old cells. And then when all my mating nooks are full, or all my splits are full of 2-day-old cells, then I put the cell, I'll let them finish the cell, and on the 7th day, I will pull the cells out and put them in a virgin bank, in little cages, in a virgin bank, and then I'll introduce virgins into splits. And that, introducing virgins into splits, made about a 20% difference in how many queens we have returned. Roy?
If you got that swarm, you go back in a week and you see you don't have a queen. So is it too late then to put in a frame of cat brood? So you got your
Yep.
nurse bee? It's too late.
It's too late. Once you see you don't have a queen, they're past wanting to raise a queen. You might get a queen cell. I mean, this isn't a zero-sum thing, because you're dealing with nature, and when you think you've got nature figured out, it laughs at you. And it says, yeah, you don't have nothing figured out. So, but most of the time, it's too late. Once you see that they don't have a queen, because they've been a swarm, by the time you catch them, they've probably been out of the hive for 3 or 4 days. And you catch them, you put them in a hive, and it's another week before you check it. So they're out of the hive for 10 days. The young bees, even if they've just been a day old from emergence, they're 10 days old at that time. And they're beginning to get to the edge of where that they may or may not accept those larvae that you're putting in there for them to make a queen out of. You give them another 10 days, and they're not going to make a queen out of them. So you're right on the edge there. It's better to put a cell in them. They'll do fine with a cell, even if it's an uncapped cell. If you find a frame in a hive that has an uncapped queen cell in it, but it has larva or an egg, you can put that in there and they'll finish it. Even that age of bees will finish it. But if you're depending on them to actually make the cell, they're kind of reluctant at that. Yes?
If you're in that situation, what do you recommend? I do combines. I use a double screen for 72 hours and do a combine. At that point there, I make them as one so I don't lose them.
Yeah, if I go to a swarm and it don't have a queen, what I do? Well, I've almost always got cells that I can put in. So it's a little bit different situation, but a combine is just as good. It's fine to do a combine on that. And if I do a combine, if it's really hot weather, I'll use a screen in between them. If it's not in really hot weather where I live, it's 90 degrees or above. If it's not 90 degrees, I'll just put a piece of paper over them and set them down and let them figure it all out themselves. And that's a good way to combine. Don't be afraid to combine a hive. Don't think that you're losing a hive. You're combining a hive. That bigger population is going to make that hive a lot more productive. And they're going to come back. If they got a queen that's worth anything, they're going to come back really quick. And you can split it right back out. Give it 2 weeks and you can split the thing and wind up with more bees than you had to begin with. Don't be intimidated by splitting hives. It's so simple. It's a good swarm prevention. Well, prevention's not a good word. Deterrent is a better word. You can reduce the amount of swarms that you have by splitting big hives that you think are probably going to swarm anyway. But you can come out just as well by combining hives that are queenless and then splitting that again once they build back up. You need 1 to 2 frames of brood of all ages. If you're making a split, you need a frame of uncapped brood. Bees will stay with larvae. They won't stay with pupa every time. Pupa don't mean a lot to them. Larva does. Larva has to be fed and cared for. Pupa, I tell people that if you're trying to put this in human terms, a larva is like your doorbell ringing at 3 o'clock in the morning and there being a baby on the doorstep. nobody in their right mind would not take that baby in and love it and take care of it. But if the doorbell rings at 3 in the morning and there's a mouthy 13-year-old, you're gonna slam the door and say, get a haircut and get a job. That's the difference between how bees look at pupa and larva. They're going to stay with larva. They don't always stay with pupa. Sometimes they will, not always. So, if you're making splits, just make sure that your split has some larvae in it. That will hold the bee population in there. Yes?
Yeah, Ken, go back to, you were going from your virgin bank and then taking a virgin queen, putting it into a known split, right?
Yeah.
Not into a swarm, because the swarm may not have nurse bees.
Well, a virgin queen's okay. You can put a virgin queen in a swarm because that's almost a natural state for that swarm.
What if it's a secondary swarm and they're all old bees?
It's okay if it's a virgin queen.
If it's a virgin queen,
Yeah.
okay, because
If they're not having to make that cell, it's okay.
Right.
And I just realized last year why we have so much better percentage. We get 95%, 90 to 95% of our virgin queens that I drop in a hive come back mating and become laying queens. Whereas cells that we put in a hive, it's about 70%, sometimes lower. And I just realized last year why that was. One day I was putting in virgins, and I was thinking, man, it is a nice day to be working bees. And it just struck me that I was putting in virgins and I was back checking hives that I'd put virgins in 2 days before. Just 2 days before. I was checking them on a Friday, and I'd put virgins in those hives on a Wednesday morning. And there were already eggs in those hives. The virgin obviously took a flight, probably the first day she was in there, and came back. And it just hit me that it's like a light bulb went off. I'm putting cells in, and I don't know when exactly the cell's going to emerge. It may be raining, or it may be cold weather, or it may be super windy. And the virgin emerges, she takes a mating flight and don't come back. Or she emerges and it rains for a week and she never takes a mating flight and becomes a drone layer. But when I'm putting those virgins in, it's a nice day. I don't put virgins in a rainstorm, and they're taking their mating flight within a day, and it was all about the weather, I think. But we have a lot better return with virgins that I drop in hives than I do with the cells that I put in hives. And they come from the same cells.
When you introduce the virgin, are you just putting them directly in, or?
Yep, direct release. What I do is I take some sugar syrup with Honeybee Healthy in it, spray it over the top of the frames of bees, and the cage that the virgin's in, I just spray a little bit on that, take the cell cap off and lay it on top of the frames and put it together. Let her walk out. And it works really well for me. You may do it and never have a live queen come back. But
And they accept her, like, there's
Yeah.
no like orientation period for her, like.
by the time they get all that Honeybee Healthy and sugar syrup licked off of one another, they don't care what's in there.
But you couldn't do that with an already mated queen. You couldn't.
Yes, you can.
Drop an already mated queen right on the top.
You
just
can,
like that.
if you do that same thing.
Never.
Yeah, it's all about the grooming process of the bees, and they groom one another, and then they groom the queen. And they say, wait a minute, I don't think you're the same one that was in here yesterday, but you taste good. I have a commercial beekeeper friend that, people in Kentucky think I'm a really big beekeeper, and the only thing big about me being a beekeeper is I weigh about 240 pounds. But he is a big beekeeper. He has about 25,000 hives. And they do introduce cells, use cells, but a lot of times when they back check mating nukes and there's no queen in there, they release a mated queen in there. And I mean, it's gross the way that they do it, but it works for them. They wait until dark after it's dark, when all the bees are home, they spit on the queen and put her down in the front, right at the front door. And it's almost the same thing. The bees, the guard bees, go up to the mated queen that's going in and say, whoa, what's this nasty stuff all over you? And we'll clean you up. And she's accepted. Once the guard bees accept the queen going in the front door, she's good. And no telling what they've got on their mouth. I mean, I know these guys, and they're not hygienic. Roy, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm about to go a little Anyway, back whenever you was putting a queen cell in a swarm a week later, when you figured out there's no queen, well, once she hatches and put in a queen cell, you might be a week later, and then by the time she starts laying eggs and has larvae, you got all these old bees. Who's
Right.
taking care of the larvae?
The old bees will take care of them, but what he's talking about is old bees taking care of larvae. You'll see this, I see it fairly often, but I mean, just in a hive here and a hive there, you'll see a queen that has a perfect pattern, but it's this big around. And there's lots of bees in there for 4 frames. And then they just never build up. And that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a hive that had old bees in it. The queen was laying a complete pattern, because you'll see eggs out here, but the bees are cannibalizing what they can't feed. That's what happens with old bees trying to raise young larvae. They'll cannibalize what they're not capable of feeding. And it will build up, but it's a slow build up until it reaches a critical mass where it becomes exponential. And they never thrive. Those hives never thrive, but they do survive. They're usually pretty good at surviving because the queen's laying a solid pattern. You got a good queen, just not enough young bees. You have to give it time. Yes?
If you've got that, you could give them a frame of cat brood.
You give them a
at the
frame of
same
count
time
brood,
that would
you
sorta-
do like Meyer and give them a frame of count brood, and in a week it'll change the entire complexion of that hive. Yes?
Do you feel when you catch a swarm that it's more prone to swarm eating season because it's in their genetics at that point?
I think there is something to that, but I don't care. A bee's a bee, and I'm figuring I can probably kill them quicker than that. But, you know, there's so many things that ways that a hive can go south anymore that I'm not worried too much about introducing swarming genetics into our bees. The one thing about swarming genetics, they're just almost by definition, they're really good at making queens. So they'll make good queen cells. They'll make a lot of queen cells. And you know, like I said, there's a pro and a con to all this. But the thing to take away from this presentation is, if you want to build your bee business, grow into it, learn how to make splits, and give up a honey crop if you have to. Make splits and make splits from your splits. If you learn how to take one hive in April and turn it into 4 in September, you'll stay in business and you'll increase your numbers. Keep a nuke for every 2 hives that you have, all through the summer. If that nuke grows up and gets too big for the box, take a couple of frames out of it, add to a weak hive. It'll make a big difference in your bees. But you've always got a queen there, you've always got something you can plug into a hive, a swarm that's queenless. You've always got some kind of resource there that you can use. So if you will keep one nuke, 50% of the nukes, that you have bees. Now, we don't do that because it'd be a lot of nukes to keep, but we're always splitting hives all summer long, just to keep them in the hive, pretty much. Any last questions? Roy, you got a last question?
It'll never be the last.
Now I forgot again. You find that queen to swarm, you got your nuke sitting there, you got a queen in there, instead of putting her in a cage and introducing her, can you pull that frame out with her on a lot of bees and just?
If I'm introducing a queen from a nuke into a queenless swarm, I take the queenless swarm, put them in a second box, and put that nuke in the bottom box right in the middle, and make it look like a bee with empty frames, and I'll let them figure it out.
Or you take the whole nuke?
I'll take the whole nuke and put it in there, and then I'll break that out. Once they start building up, I'll make another nuke from them. But the reason for that is, if you've got a foreign queen to that hive and you're not wanting to do the sugar syrup thing and all that, at least keep 3 frames where she can kind of stay in friendly territory down here, away from the bees that might want to harm her. Within a day, they'll have it figured out.
And you say you put her on the bottom?
I put her on the bottom.
3
Yeah,
frames?
yeah. So, one thing about honeybees, we try to make little people out of them, and it just don't work. But if you're comparing a honeybee's life to our life, this will give you a perspective on how important it is to feed when they need feeding, to do things in a timely manner. One day to a honeybee is like 2 years in our life. In the summer, they live 40, 45 days. We live 75, 80 years. So one day is close to 2 years in our life. That's how important it is to do things in a timely manner with bees. If you don't get treated for varroa mites in a timely way, it's like us living with ticks all over us for 2 years. And I'm not doing that. Any other questions? I think we're over time, but that's my habit.
Back to when you were spitting on the bees. With the spitting aside, you mentioned something about put that queen in the bottom and let her go in. What do you see the difference between letting a queen go in the entrance, crawling in herself, and putting one in the top? What works
Because
best?
when she's past the guard bees, she's got the okay. Anything that comes in the bottom, the bees that are in that hive, they know that it's been okayed by the guard bees. If you drop it in the top, they're like, whoa, where'd that come from?
So you release all your virgins at the bottom, right below walk into the hive?
What's that?
Your virgin queens, you just release them in the bottom and walk in the hive?
A lot of them I release in the bottom, but most of my virgins, I would drop them in a back corner of the bottom box, away from where all the bees are, you know. And I will spray them, and you know they'll still be sprayed, and they'll have to be groomed, but I'm still a little bit nervous about just walking one in the daylight. At night, it's different because it's only guard bees down there. At night, in the daylight, there's lots of foragers coming and going that can be ill-tempered. If the guard bees aren't ill-tempered, they're all business. They might seem ill-tempered, but they're like, show me your papers. The foragers are like, you bumped into me and I'm gonna kill you because you don't smell right.